This
In
conference
short,
will now be recorded.
thanks, Ben. In short, this concept of drought advisors is to provide some like direct support for our producers statewide to make risk management decisions around drought and you know how to manage the upcoming year based on expected climate conditions. So this is very much a pilot concept, and I think this group that's organizing this project is based with CSU, and they're meeting weekly to just get this idea up and running. I will, here, all right, I'm posting it in the chat now. This is the information I have. That said, there were lots of emails yesterday flying around about like updates to this, but I think this is the most up to date. And there's like a little image. I'll find a way to post that image once people are presenting. Any other things? Otherwise, we can jump into, looks like Peter just arrived. So we can jump into the report from the state climatologist whenever he is ready and has his slides up and running. Until then, anything for the good of the order? No, okay.
You say you're ready for me, Megan?
We are so ready for you. Are you ready?
Just a second here.
You're good.
Let's
I'm
see.
trying to figure out how to share an image.
Yeah, Ben, Peter and I both got confused because there was a Google Meet link in the calendar invite, and yeah. Peter and I were hanging out there for a minute and then realized that we were in the wrong place.
Well, Russ, I should know better.
Sorry about that.
And
I'll
did
go
the
ahead
same
and move
exact
those
thing.
from future.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I'm just by habit, you know.
Okay, are you seeing my opening slide?
We see it. Go for it.
Cool. So this is probably going to be another one of those mostly bad news WATF updates. December wasn't horrible, but of course snowpack is lagging behind, and we're not making up the ground that we lost in 2020. So that's, I guess, the spoiler alert for the day. But here's a quick look at December. Jumping into things, we'll start with a quick look at temperature across the state. The month of December was fairly normal. We saw near normal temperatures across most of the eastern plains, some above normal in the northeast corner of the state and on the northern side of the urban corridor. I wouldn't pay too much attention to those cold spots in South Park and North Park. I think that's just a model hiccup there. The main thing I'd pay attention to is just you're seeing by and large near normal in western Colorado as well, a bit of a mix of above and below. If we look at the month of January to date, or at least a couple days behind the current date, we see again a mix of above and below normal, a fair bit above on the eastern plains. Interestingly, it's been dry but cold for parts of western Colorado to start the year 2021. It's part of it, kind of an interesting larger pattern where we've had cool but dry air over a lot of the Colorado River Basin, and then anomalously warm air to the north of there. And when you have, you know, cooler than normal air to the south and warmer than normal air to the north, you basically have less of a temperature difference than normal from north to south across the country, which is not at all characteristic of what you would think for La Nina. I'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. If we zoom out to our water year, not quite to date, but through the end of the calendar year, the first quarter of the water year, we see that, again, mostly near normal temperatures on the eastern plains, but shading above normal in the western part of the state. The month of November was quite a bit warmer than normal, so that has a big influence on the map you're seeing here. And then this will be a common theme throughout the talk, is that the further that we go back, the more you see the damage that the drought has done already. We'll see it a little bit more in terms of the precipitation numbers, but certainly if we look at just the last calendar year, 2020, It was the 8th warmest on record statewide, and it looks like 6 of our top 8 years have occurred since 2010. So really temperature-wise, not too out of the ordinary for the last decade. We see that temperatures were more anomalous generally on the western side of the state than the eastern side of the state as well. All right, if we take a look at precipitation, again, we have a little bit of a mix for December 2020. About this time last year, we were in a situation where the mountains were getting regular snows, but the eastern plains were being left high and dry. If we look at December 2020, what we see is somewhat the reverse of that, where we had a couple, decent storms for December on the eastern plains, but it was generally a pretty poor month for snowpack out west. The exceptions would probably be areas like the Sangre de Cristos. One thing to keep in mind is that this pattern isn't as good as the map makes it look, because the eastern plains are climatologically quite dry throughout the winter. So it doesn't take a lot of precipitation to be above normal for the month of December. So these kinds of numbers aren't really making much of a divot in the overall deficits that we accrued in 2020, versus on the western side of the state, by comparison, December is a more important month. So the areas here falling behind, not the areas that we'd want to fall behind, because it's at least closer to being part of their wet season. And if we take a look at the year of 2021, almost to date, I wouldn't pay attention to that purple spot in Rio Blanco County. That's probably a station error, maybe snowfall recorded as precipitation, but it's generally been very dry to start the year, again, in western Colorado and parts of the eastern plains. The Grand Junction area has seen next to nothing or nothing to start the year. But again, the brighter spots that we're seeing here, the western portion of the Ark River Valley, or sorry, not western, southern portion of the Ark River Valley, kind of southwest portion, and the San Luis Valley have done better for the water year to date than, or sorry, just the calendar year to date than other places. And that's going to be a fairly consistent theme throughout this update as well, is that those are the areas of the state that have fared better in recent weeks and months. So again, we're going to do a little bit of a zoom out in time, and here we are looking at the first quarter of the water year, so October through December, and we see dry conditions on both sides of the state, with some areas in the middle that are faring a little bit better, like the Rio Grande River Valley and the headwaters of the Arkansas River Basin, but dryness in both the eastern and western portions of the state. And then, of course, no secret here, if we look back at the calendar year, 2020 was a very dry one. We just continued to fall further and further behind. Hard to find a good rain or snow maker that really hit the state that we could hang our hats on. It ended up being the second driest calendar year on record, second driest only to 2002. So when you combine that with which is somewhat to be expected with both rising temperatures in general and the fact that our drier years are typically our warmer years, it was a doozy of a year. All right, so now we're going to take a look at some individual station data using some of these climate subregions that were crafted by Klaus Wolter based on their precipitation climatologies. And we're going to start with Region 1 and the Grand Lake Station and work our way around counterclockwise. I'll caution you with these first couple stations, Grand Lake in particular, it looks a little worse than it actually is. There is a fair bit of missing data here, so I don't want to harp on the slow start to the water year too much. The Grand Lake has had a very slow start to the water year, but these graphics, both Grand Lake and Steamboat, are missing a little bit of data and make the current situation look a little worse than it actually is. Once we get to Grand Junction, Walker Field, though, no missing data here. Dry as can be since the start of the calendar year. And already our above normal projections for the water year are falling significantly behind the normal curve that we would see in a normal year. If you look at some of those faded gray traces, those are precipitation accumulation patterns that we've seen in past years at the station. As you can see, we're not beyond getting back to a normal year, but especially when we consider that last year was so dry, we're really seeing the impact of this in terms of not only low snowpack, but low antecedent soil moisture conditions going into the winter season, which tends to hurt runoff efficiency, and just a generally low water table and base flows right now as this drought lingers and grows more into the kind of hydrologic phase of drought. Montrose, fairly similar story to Grand Junction. Again, we're falling behind only 52% of average to start the water year. As we go south to Mesa Verde, Mesa Verde is again well behind at only looks like 35% of average to start the year, and Mesa Verde has had some really poor years just in recent history too. The start of water year 2018 was much worse than the start of water year 2021, believe it or not. Alamosa, Bregman Field, all right, we got one above average, feels good. Like I said, the San Luis Valley or Rio Grande River Valley, one of the better spots in the state currently. Of course, this is an area that is climatologically quite dry, so it doesn't take a whole lot of precip to keep it above normal, but nice to have what feels like a win there nonetheless. This is the Colorado Springs Municipal Station Airport, and the Colorado Springs area, we're looking at the banana belt. It's often quite dry during the winter, but gets the bulk of its precipitation during the summer monsoon season. So plenty of time for this deficit to turn around in the Colorado Springs area. And then if we look at Walsh, I would largely regard this in a similar manner to the Colorado Springs station, where southeast Colorado, the wet season is the summer, the winter is fairly dry. So as you can see from our traces and projections, a normal water year is by no means being lost yet. Akron, again, another one on the dry side, but falls into the category of the last couple stations where we're going to be keeping a close eye on the spring and early summer. And then Boulder is kind of somewhere in between those recent stations I mentioned and the ones out west, where Boulder we do expect a decent fraction of the moisture in winter as snowfall, but still the wet season is spring and early summer. And you can see a number of those traces going above normal, even with the current data being well below normal at just 55% of average. I always love looking at Boulder, looking at this trace from 2013, just sticking out like a sore thumb, going from below normal to record wet just right at the end of the water year there. All right, we'll go through these pretty quickly, but standardized precipitation indices, we're just looking at precipitation in a different way, where it's ranked based on where it stands in the historical distribution, and the color coding is designed to match the color coding of the U.S. Drought Monitor. So this darker red is the D4 equivalent, red is D3 equivalent, and so on and so forth up through D0. And then the wet colors the cool colors indicate gradually wetter conditions. There are some good SPIs in the headwaters of the Arkansas River Basin on the 30-day time scale, but not much elsewhere. Some drier SPIs in the Denver metro area and in the Colorado headwaters, as well as out west. And then we see, if we go back to the 90-day standardized precipitation index, that more of these drier than normal stations are starting to stand out on the west slopes. Again, Arkansas headwaters, Rio Grande River Valley looking better. And then if we go out further in time, we start to see just how bad this drought has been. We've got plenty of D4 equivalent SPIs in the headwaters of the Yampa and Colorado river basins. If we look at the last 6 months in time, and then 12 months, we see that dryness all over the state with some D3 and D4 equivalent SPIs on both sides of the continental divide, and then a mix kind of from D1 to D3 on the urban corridor, stretching all the way down from Fort Collins to Pueblo. All right, now I'll do a quick reservoir and soils update. You'll see a lot more about reservoirs from NRCS after me, so I won't spend too much time on that. And then we'll take a little bit of a look at soil moisture. Lake Granby to start the water year, still showing decent storage. Lake Granby has had decent storage through the last couple droughts, weathered them pretty well, but with the snowpack below normal. We'll see how this year goes. Certainly the major reservoirs that we tend to be concerned about at this point, given the storage volumes, are further south, like Blue Mesa Reservoir, just at 77% of average, and certainly with a poor snowpack year and potentially poor runoff efficiency, could sink even lower. McPhee in southwest Colorado, also in poor shape after barely getting a bump from what looked like it might be a decent snowpack last year, but again, we had in 2020 a pretty inefficient runoff. And then, of course, there's the bigger looming factor of both Lake Powell and Lake Mead are near their historic lows. And with poor snowpack throughout much of the upper Colorado River Basin, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Powell and Mead over the next 1 to 2 years. All right, if we take a look at soil moisture, I've been talking a lot about soil moisture in terms of how it impacts runoff efficiency. I should mention that, again, the coloring on these graphics is designed to match the US Drought Monitor. So the dark red is, again, D4 equivalent, red D3, and so on down to D0, and the gray being anything above the 30th percentile. Here we're just looking at the top 10 centimeters, and we can see a number of areas that are dry, but if we go and look a little bit deeper, we see the damage of the last year's drought, looking at the top meter. Certainly, if we could look even deeper, we would also see some of the damage of the last year's drought. A number of the areas that are showing especially low soil moisture are areas at high elevation, where any precipitation that may have fallen in the last few months would have likely been as snow that's still sitting there as snowpack. So you may get a little bit of a different picture if you were looking at snow water equivalent plus soil moisture, at least in a normal year. But since the snowpack is also low this year, the percentiles for snowpacks plus SWE may also look pretty low. But again, you see that most of the state is on the dry side of normal when it comes to soil moisture, and a lot of places well below normal, much of the eastern plains in D2, D3, or D4 levels with soil moisture. And then again, our better spots, San Luis Valley, parts of the Ark River Basin, although they've certainly had their share of challenges. All right, this is a look at the US Drought Monitor map that was made closest to the end of water year 2020. I just want to compare it to now. We already knew we were in a doozy of a drought then, but the Drought Monitor has generally gotten worse over the last few months, where we see things have moved from D3 to D4 across much of western Colorado, and we've certainly seen introduction of more D3 and a little pocket of D4 south in the metro area over the last several months. If we take a look at how things have changed in the last 6 months, so a little bit longer than the water year to date, we see changes have been made in terms of significant degradations in the northern portion of the state, particularly northwest Colorado. Some improvements in areas that I've previously highlighted as doing better in recent months. One of the more significant improvements in the San Luis Valley was when we had that freak September snowstorm early in September that actually ended up being one of Alamosa's largest snowstorms for any time in the calendar year, let alone it being early September. All right, now I'm going to kind of shift gears into the outlook. And we are still in a La Nina, and the sea surface temperature anomaly map shown here is pretty indicative of La Nina, where you generally have cooler than normal or cool sea surface temperature anomalies in the eastern equatorial Pacific, and those are extending all the way out into the central Pacific. In more of a classic La Nina setup, you would see those anomalies hugging the eastern coast of the Pacific more strongly, whereas now they're sort of drifting out more into the center of the Pacific. From what I've seen, it looks like this La Nina is maybe starting to die down, but the interesting thing about this La Nina is that it just hasn't behaved at all like a normal La Nina, so it has us sort of questioning how much sense it makes to steer outlooks based on what a La Nina would typically look like, and I'll show a couple examples of that here. So La Nina, are you sure this is the departure from normal temperature across the contiguous U.S. over the last 60 days, where I mentioned that the upper Colorado River Basin, despite being dry in most areas, has been on the cooler side of normal, and then we've seen much warmer than normal conditions across the northern Great Plains. One thing I should say here is that the northern Great Plains have incredibly high temperature variability in winter. So it's not surprising, whether it be warm or cold, that that's the area of the map that would sort of draw our eye when we're looking at departure from normal temperature. However, La Nina is typically more marked in our part of the world by cooler than normal conditions up in the northern Great Plains and warmer than normal conditions down in the southern states and Gulf states, where we have a stronger temperature gradient or temperature difference from south to north that generally leads to a strong kind of unified polar jet stream with kind of one storm track that comes through a little bit to the north of our area a lot of the time, but hitting us with some bursts of cold air from time to time. And that's just not the kind of pattern that we are seeing. If you showed me this temperature pattern with no knowledge of whether it was La Nina or El Nino and asked me to guess, I would probably guess that this was an El Nino year. And then just another kind of La Nina are you sure map. This is just yesterday's no risk analysis of where we have snow on the ground and how much water is in that snow. Unusual, especially in a La Nina this deep into the winter, to see so much of the northern Great Plains snow-free. If we look at forecasts for what's happening with La Nina now, we see that it's beginning to die out according to most models, although some have things going the other way. If we look at the dynamical and statistical averages in green and red, we're seeing conditions trend towards a neutral year once conditions are less than an anomaly of 0.5 Celsius on the cool side. In the eastern equatorial Pacific, we generally aren't really thinking of that as a La Nina. And then this CPC guideline actually shows that they're thinking of it dying out a little bit more quickly and dramatically, which is interesting. In terms of short-term outlooks, I should mention that this weekend we are going to see a pattern shift, and it looks like this will be some of the best snow that we've had in our Western Rockies all year, particularly for the San Juans, which is encouraging to see. We could definitely use that moisture. And this pattern, if we look further west, does have some staying power looking out to the 8 to 14 day outlook. However, it does look like a high pressure ridge may build in over the south central portion of the country, and that may kind of keep Colorado on the shoulder of receiving some of that Pacific moisture. We may see a little bit out west in that 8 to 14 day time frame. Once we get east of the continental divide were favored for warmer and drier than normal, though, with most of the moisture and cooler temperatures staying further out west towards the Pacific coast. Here's the February, March, April outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, hot off the presses this morning. And of course, Colorado is shaded towards warmer than normal temperatures and drier than normal precip. Part of this is based on trend. My understanding with the precipitation forecasts is not only are they expecting us to see a little bit more of the normal La Nina pattern signature, but also their dynamical models are leaning towards drier than normal conditions for Colorado for quite a few months out into the future. What I saw from the Climate Prediction Center in terms of dynamical models was pretty discouraging, in that it looked like we would likely be favored for below normal precipitation through much of the spring and summer, which could potentially spell disaster. Of course, these forecasts have quite a bit of uncertainty, but we also know climatologically that in a classic La Nina, we are pretty unlikely to see wet extremes for much of the state in spring. You might see a wet extreme in the northern Rockies in winter, but the spring wet extremes are a little bit rarer. So in that sense, I guess we're hoping that this La Nina continues to behave atypically, or that it breaks down quickly as the CPC is kind of leaning towards, and maybe leads to some more favorable patterns setting up. This is the outlook for March, April, May, and as you can see, if we toggle between the last two slides, there's really just not much of a difference there. You're going to hear again a lot more about snowpack, but this is where we stand currently in terms of basins, where we're under these 70% of normal mark for much of the west slopes. Arkansas and Rio Grande basins looking a little bit better. I was kind of in terms of outlook, I was kind of tracing out what would happen in each of these basins in terms of peak snowpack if from here through early to mid-April we got either 20th percentile precipitation or 80th percentile precipitation. And there's a number of take-home points here. A couple interesting things. One, it's not too late for an average snowpack year if we have above normal precipitation. Two, this of course isn't the entire range of variability, the 20th to 80th percentile, so could see even higher or even lower for sure. And three, it's interesting, we've been so dry recently that in areas like the Yampa River Basin, even a 20th percentile projection would actually raise our percentage of normal snowpack. So that would be an improvement over what we've had so far. Another thing that you might see with these numbers is that generally the southern basins are more historically variable, like the San Juans tend to see more snowpack variability from year to year. The northern Rockies see more storms that tend to be less snow per storm, whereas the San Juans, snowpack tends to go more as the big storms go. So how many of those hat hangers do we get? And it looks like the coming week anyway will be good for the San Juans. We'll see beyond that. But you know, the overall takeaway here is that we're likely to end up with below normal snowpack. And if you pile on top of that low antecedent soil moisture and low base flows, this Colorado Basin River Forecast Center projection for our our runoff season really kind of states it well, where we're seeing peak water supply largely in the 50 to 75% of normal range for much of Colorado, and some even worse numbers further down in the upper Colorado River Basin, like towards Lake Powell. So definitely discouraging water supply forecast right now. So some of the takeaways here: Colorado remains firmly in the clutches of drought. Impacts in 2020 were largely agricultural or ecological, but the hydrologic impacts may worsen if we don't turn around this snow season. It's those multi-year droughts that really hurt from a hydrologic standpoint. December was pretty close to normal in a lot of ways, but January has reverted to warm and dry, and snowpack is well on the low end of normal for this time of the snow season. And while we remain in La Nina, not only has this La Nina not been typical, but it is dying out at this point. Typically, La Nina is a good thing for snowpack in northwest Colorado, not so much in the southern portion of the state. This year, it just hasn't panned out that way at all. And then La Nina springs, we rarely see a wet extreme. You know, El Nino tends to be a lot more promising once we turn the corner into spring than La Nina is. So, you know, seasonal guidance, there's a lot of uncertainty, but as far as we know, we're just not seeing the signs pointing towards us getting bailed out anytime soon. So we should be prepared for a low runoff year. So yeah, I'll wrap up there, and sorry to be the bad news guy again, but if there's questions, be happy to take those at this point. Anyone? All right, I'll go ahead and stop my share here.
Thanks, Peter. That was helpful. Swithin, did you have some thoughts?
No, I was just going to tell Peter that bad news guy, but I'd rather have that. I'm more on I don't want to say accurate, but that's really the only word. Rather have accurate and good news than sugarcoating it. So bad news, but keeping us informed as to where we're really at is more important.
I completely agree. Prepared.
Yep, thanks, Swithin. I'm thinking more and more that it's probably a good thing we, you know, made the drought declaration when we did.
Thanks. Let's see, up next we have the report from Natural Resource Conservation Service, and Carl's already on it.
All right, good morning, everyone. And can you see my screen there?
Yes, it's not in presentation mode yet, but we can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, there we go. Yeah, and I saw a comment from Kevin in there. Sorry that I may or may not continue the Captain Bring Down train here. Yeah, we'll just kind of go through the normal presentation and just focus more on what's been going on with snowpack in the mountainous regions, as well as water supply forecasts, and some more info on reservoirs. Ooh, maybe. There we go. So we'll start up in the northwest Colorado. Currently in the Yampa and White Basins, sitting at 68% of normal snowpack. And we really, this is going to mirror a lot of what Peter said, but yeah, things across the state have really dried out quite a bit over the last month, which has not been helping the situation, but still recoverable. In this basin and really across the state, we're pretty much right at the timing of halfway to a normal peak accumulation there in early to mid-April. So still some time to recover, but we will need more precipitation coming in. Just looking at the map, we can see the individual stations, not a huge amount of variability throughout the region, kind of from the 55 to 80% of normal range, but fairly consistent, no big geographic trends across the Yampa, White, and North Platte. So these maps are our month-to-date precipitation, so the last 3 weeks here. Not as bad as other parts of the state that we'll see, but just about 50% of normal precip so far this January. And I will also note we are kind of in a transition process of redefining or kind of updating the stations we associate with our different basin summaries. So some of these numbers, these percentages will be a little bit jumpier than anticipated, but we're hoping to get those all lined back up as soon as we can. But water year-to-date precipitation currently sitting at 58% of average. So getting into our first round of streamflow forecasts, January 1st, kind of on the lower end, we've got the North Platte and Northgate as it goes on up into Wyoming. It's forecasted for just 52% of average. Then some of the other major pour points, the White at Meeker, 65%, Yampa at Maybell, 64%. So certainly not that encouraging, and like Peter noted, we are going to, looking at this point, like we are going to see those downstream effects as the greater basin goes down into Lake Powell. Reservoir storage, let me move this. That is a bit of good news up in these basins. It's one of two basins in the state with above average reservoir storage and a little bit over 80% of capacity. So really not an enormous amount of storage up there, but still encouraging that it exists. Oops. So moving a little south into the Colorado River headwaters. Snowpack, pretty similar, right around 70% of normal. We can see this green trace there, the very bottom line is 2018. Just as kind of a comparison of the recent year where we sit, but tracking pretty well along with 2018 so far. A lot more variability station to station than we saw up in the neighbors to the north here. Kind of out on the Grand Mesa and in the North Fork headwaters, some of the lower values, but little more sporadic, and I haven't dug into it, but I kind of wonder if maybe that's driven by elevation. But looking at all the different snow tells quite a bit more variability across the Colorado headwaters. Month to date precipitation accumulation is certainly quite a bit more grim than in the Yampa White. Some of the lows kind of in the more southern portions of the basin, they've really received little to no precip. A lot of values around kind of centering around that 40% of normal, with the basin-wide average being at 36% of a usual amount. Looking at the water year, with things slowing down, we're sitting at 64% of average accumulated precipitation since October 1st. And I think Peter hit home on this real good, but really one of the big take-home points when looking at this water year stuff is how we started out in a pretty severe drought going into it, and how dry summer and fall were. So it's that's really is going to impact our stream flows next spring. So it's almost deceivingly encouraging just looking since October 1st with how much the soils got dried out this summer. Looking into our volumetric forecasts, fairly closely clustered, kind of around the 70% of average range throughout the basin. All the way up in the headwaters, Lake Granby, 71%, and then all the way down to the Colorado River near Cameo as it nears Grand Junction at 67%. So despite some of the different values we're seeing at snowtel sites, really a pretty tight cluster of forecasts throughout the upper Colorado. Looking at our reservoir storage, this is, I believe, the only other basin in the state with above average storage. I think it's 103 or 104% average right now, and looks to be maybe in the range of 75% of capacity. So really in the big picture, given our dry conditions, that is encouraging to have that storage available. So looking at our time series of reservoir storage here, not a huge amount of fluctuations throughout the previous year, and then just over the last couple of months, it's bumped up slightly, but no real significant changes. But again, I think the good news there is it is near normal, which should hopefully offer some flexibility come springtime. Going over into the Northern Front Range, or I guess the other side of it, into the South Platte Basin. Snowpack's looking a little bit better. Again, tracking pretty similarly to 2018, but it's currently at 78% of normal. As we're looking at these, or when I post the presentation online, you can always take note of these statistics in the upper left corner. As we go farther through the season, I think this percent of normal needed to reach the peak is always an interesting thing to keep track of. So as of now, we need basically 120% of normal accumulation throughout the next several months to reach a normal peak snowpack. Looking at the station by station, not quite as much variability as over in the Colorado, and just a little bit better values overall. Yeah, kind of sporadic, not a north to south trend that really jumps out per se, looking along the continental divide there. Month to date precip so far has had, I believe, the best in the state, which is unfortunate to say that it is only 64% of average, but at this point we'll kind of take what we can get. And a little more variability in that month to date, presumably just depending on how the storms came in throughout the basin, probably just through elevation and as well as north to south. So looking all the way back to October, that has left us with 75% of normal water year-to-date precipitation in the South Platte. So here's again our first round of streamflow forecasts. And obviously it is still early in the season and a lot can change. So the skill of these will just increase every month as we go on through, but fairly tight range there as well, largely in just the general 70 to low 80s% of average range is what we're looking at so far. But I know our forecasters do work with the Noah River forecast centers and work with their soil moisture models and do their best to account for those conditions, but it will be the kind of year where I think only time will tell what the true impact of those really dry soils are once the snow starts to melt. So looking at reservoir storage, obviously quite a bit more storage in the South Platte than some other basins, but looks to be in the high 80s, maybe 85+% of average storage, and a little less than 60% of total capacity is currently filled. Here, sorry, I need to move my screen here. So pretty dramatic decline in time. So we've got this high peak is October 2019, and pretty steady decline in reservoir storage ever since then, unfortunately. So going over to the western slope into the Gunnison River Basin, where things have definitely been looking significantly drier, particularly over the last month. Snowpack in the Gunnison sits at about 64% of the median, which we use as our quote unquote normal. But again, just this last month, you can see it's functionally flatlined. Some accumulations, but really not a terrible amount to speak of. Again, kind of some drier conditions up on the Grand Mesa and further to the east over towards McClure Pass, as well as quite dry on the Uncompahgre Plateau. A little bit better in the higher mountains. We got this one outlier that's got 124%. I think that might be Sargent's Mesa or something, but yeah, certainly drier on the Uncompahgre Plateau as well as on Grand Mesa than in other portions of the mountainous regions of the Gunnison. So here, the next couple basins, we're going to be seeing a lot of red on these maps. Month to date, only 19% of normal precipitation, so really pretty much nothing to speak of there. That's a very small amount. And that has left the Gunnison sitting at 56% of normal water year to date so far after this dry month. So looking at our stream flow forecasts, fair amount of variability. We've got kind of on the higher end, off the backside or the west side of Monarch Pass, we've got Tamichi Creek at Sargent's there, forecast for 83% of normal. Then again, some of the stuff moving east in the North Fork and other streams coming off the Grand Mesa quite a bit lower, down below 50% of normal. Uncompahgre, 62%, and then kind of the big pour point there when it confluences with the Colorado near Grand Junction, forecasted for 57% of average volumes. And all of these were on the map. We're looking at the April through July forecast. As we go through the season, those periods change, but these are just the total volumes from April 1st through July 31st we're looking at. So reservoir storage, and Peter touched base on Blue Mesa, but across the whole basin sitting at a little bit below 80% of average and right around 50% of total capacity. So we've certainly seen it worse, but not great considering the dry conditions we are seeing. Looking at our long-term time series, pretty consistently dropping throughout kind of the last calendar year. Just a slight blip over the last several months here. You see it bump back up, but still in that well below normal range. So moving down into the even drier southern San Juan basins. Snowpack is currently 65% of normal. And here you can really see, it looks like maybe they got some recent precipitation, just a tiny blip there, but pretty much just extremely dry throughout 2021 so far. Quite a bit of station by station variability, and a lot of this certainly is driven by elevation. Some of these lower elevation sites to the south as you get closer to Durango. And again, we already saw this is a Columbine Pass up on the Uncompahgre Plateau, receiving less precipitation as snow accumulated. So here's, I believe, our driest January region so far, at a whopping 12% of average accumulated precipitation so far. So that was really good to see that there's hope for quite a bit of snow coming in here shortly from that 7-day outlook that Peter showed. So hopefully that comes to fruition. That's left our water year-to-date precipitation at 53% of average for the southern San Juans. So going into our actual stream flow forecasts, there's some lower ones, but a lot of them generally clustered around that 60% of normal range. A little bit better to the east as we move over closer to the Rio Grande, which has one of the better snowpacks in the state right now. Mancos is on the low end there at just 46%, but quite a few generally close to 60% of average stream flow forecasts rather. Reservoir storage is looking a little more grim at this point, just 60% of average at this point and less than 40% of total capacity in those basins. You can see where that came from in our time series. Really pretty much no accumulation with last year's stream flow runoff, and has been kind of a steady decline over the last calendar year, a little bit more. Now on to the Rio Grande, which is encouraging. Got a big storm there right at the end of the year. You can see that big jump at the end of December there. Been pretty dry throughout January, but snowpack's not sitting too bad, especially in the big picture of other basins we're looking at, currently at 87% of normal. And so here in this basin, we can definitely see kind of more of that spatial variability across, where the southern sangres over here on the east side of the basin are really doing pretty good, with pretty much all those stations being significantly above normal with respect to snowpack, whereas more on the western edge in the southeast San Juans, a bit lower, but still not terrible compared to other basins we're looking at. Month-to-date precipitation, as we saw on the graph, not quite so hot, just 25% of average, but still is encouraging that they accumulated a fair amount of snow at the end of December. So hopefully that picks back up, and some of the sites on the western edge can get some accumulation out of this coming storm track. You know, as naturally, at a certain point, the snowpack commonly mirrors the precipitation once we actually get into the main accumulation season, but doing pretty good, 79% of average water year-to-date precip. Definitely some of the best stream flow forecasts, obviously primarily driven by those snowpack values we were just looking at, but definitely some of the most plentiful stream flow forecasts in the Rio Grande. You know, some of the most important ones, Rio Grande at Del Norte, which has a large influence on the the New Mexico compact, 77% of average. Again, I know these numbers don't sound great, but certainly relative to other parts of the state, it's about as good as we have. And also some of these ones in the kind of southeast portion of the basin, also a bit higher, right near normal, near 100% of average forecasted flow, mirroring those larger snowpack values we saw. Reservoir storage is on the lower end, looks to be maybe about 70% of average storage, and maybe only 20% of capacity or something like that. With respect to the reservoir storage, it certainly it's on the lower end for the state, but we can see since maybe over the last 6 months or so, some improvement, bumping it back up there, which is good to see. So moving into our final major basin, the Arkansas, on the high end of snowpack values across the state, currently 88% of normal, which isn't too bad at this point in the season. Again, about halfway through our standard accumulation season. That's really not terribly far off pace, which is good to see. A lot of these stations are used both in the Rio Grande, so you can again see here larger snowpack values in the southern portions, or kind of the southwest portion of the basin, but in the southern Sangre de Cristos there, near and some above normal there, and a little bit drier in the primary excuse me, headwaters. Month to date, precipitation kind of in the middle of the pack with respect to the other parts of the state, 48% of average so far. Looks like we got one station with 61% kind of on the high end, and a little bit lower this month so far, but again, with where the snowpack's sitting, it's about as good as any of our major basins right now. All that has left our water year-to-date precipitation at 78% average. Going into our actual stream flow forecasts, again, some of these southern basins are doing maybe slightly better, but not an enormous spread. With Arkansas at Salida, which is a pretty major point, forecast for 86% average. Going into Pueblo Reservoir, 84%. So not terrible, and we're just gonna keep hoping for more accumulation and catch up even more. Looking at our reservoir storage, also kind of in the middle of the pack statewide there. So doing pretty good for snowpack, but looks like to be about 70% of average. Reservoir storage, a little over 20% of capacity, but with John Martin and some other big ones, the percentage capacity is commonly quite low, but about 70% of average storage so far in the Arkansas. Not as, looking at our time series here, over the last year and a half, not quite as dramatic of declines as we've seen in some other basins, but with the exception of a slight increase from last year's snowmelt runoff, pretty slow and steady decline in storage averaged across the whole basin. So just taking a step back to wrap things up, looking at some of the big picture things. Statewide snowpack, we are currently sitting at 73% of normal. Again, that's the median, with a fair amount of variability basin to basin, with the Rio Grande on the high end there, Gunnison on the low end, but in the range of about, looks like about a 30% of normal spread across our different basins. And again, this number is slightly different. This product saying 71% of normal snowpack. And yeah, as I've hopefully not beat to death, right at about halfway through. So we are starting to get a vision of the range of possibilities we could end up with, but still a couple months for things to change and improve. So here's our statewide month to date, and you can see, you know, what we've seen as we ran through all the different basins, but it is always kind of interesting to take a step back, and you can really see how it jumps out, how the Northern Front Range has fared the best there, but statewide, it has been kind of a meager 39% of average precip over the last 3 weeks. And that's left our statewide water year precip at just 64%. And again, with reminder that I think everyone's heard a million times, that is coming on top of very dry conditions before October 1st as well. Looking basin to basin, you can kind of see how things have been considerably drier on the western half of the state, ranging from 53% to 65% in some of those western basins, and quite a bit better on things that are flowing south and east. So this is kind of a vague map, but just gives you a different look at the actual forecasts, generally mirroring what we've been seeing with the snowpack and precipitation, with Rio Grande looking to have the most plentiful runoff from what we can tell at this point, and a bit drier with things flowing to the west. Here's our overview of Reservoir, 82% average storage statewide, which really being a headwater state, you really kind of have to look basin to basin and just what anybody's individual interest is there. But generally, some of the lowest storages down in our southwest mountains, going out of the southern San Juans, and a little bit better as you move north across the state. Just another way to look at the time series. Haven't really seen particularly dramatic changes across the basins throughout the water year so far. Statewide values remain pretty stable, and some with slight increases, some with slight decreases, but over the last couple of months, those storages have remained pretty stable in all major basins. So we can see just at the very bottom right of this graph how it has leveled out, but can see that big decline over the last year statewide, with really very minimal response in net storage values from last year's last spring streamflow runoff, or snowmelt runoff, excuse me. One last way to look at things, here's our Swazi. I just had this one from the last time I presented in November. Really quite variable. Some are clearly lower, approaching the -3 to 4 range. But here, as of January 1st, really pretty consistently negative or near zero to negative SWASI values across the state. And then just one last slide here. I kind of just arbitrarily picked a date, and Peter covered kind of some of the more water year and summer wrap up things, but I was curious. So this is record accumulations, just precipitation since May 15th. And even if you go back a little further, it'll probably look more dramatic, but all the red dots are the record lowest precipitation amounts at our mountain snowtell sites since May 15th. The more orange ones are the second lowest on record. So I didn't pull up the actual numbers, but at a glance, it looks like that could be in the range of half of our snowtell sites did it accumulate some very, very low values over the last 30 to 40 years, or many of them have much shorter periods of record there, but just a different way to display how dry that summer really did end up being. Just as kind of a wrap up, I think most of this stuff has been pretty well covered, but yeah, January has been extremely dry across the state, so hopefully we get some more storms coming in here soon. Only 2 basins have above average reservoir storage, and I think it was 104 and 106%, so pretty close, not particularly extravagant reservoir storage. All other major basins are holding less. Currently, no basins have an above normal snowpack, and statewide we have 73% of the median at this point. And as I mentioned several times, just about halfway through the normal accumulation season, so a lot can still change, but it is starting to paint a picture of the possibilities. And yeah, as you heard from Peter, and I'm sure you're hearing from a lot of folks, we really are with the pretty significant drought statewide and dry soils, low observed fall base flows in the streams. We are expecting a lower stream flow response than we commonly would, given whatever the snowpack does end up being, that those soils are likely to really soak up a lot of that water and not make it to the actual stream channel. So kind of difficult to forecast, but something to keep an eye on, that hypothetically, if we end up with just say a normal snowpack, nobody's really anticipating that to result in a normal stream flow response. And that is all I had. If anyone has any questions.
Hey, Carl, this is Russ. This is maybe it's kind of a random question, and we had noticed this a while back, and I meant to look more closely before the meeting today, but forgot. But we noticed a couple of the sites in the Sangre de Cristos have more SWE than precip for the water year, and I wasn't sure how that was possible. And if the answer is technical, we can discuss offline because I don't want to take up a bunch of time on it. But
yeah, I'd have to look at those sites in particular, but generally that is just due to local site conditions of, you know, either undercatch from the precip gauge or additional drifting onto the snow pillow that can cause SWE to creep up above the precipitation values, which seems like in theory it shouldn't, but it's just kind of, the reality is unfortunately it's just kind of 2 different measuring sticks. And you know, if an area gets burned or clear cut and changes the wind patterns, we do unfortunately see that just from local site conditions sometimes. But I can certainly follow up if you'd like offline and try and dig up any more.
no, that's fine. Yeah, that explanation makes sense.
Carl, this is Bill Tyner with Division of Water Resources. I wondered, in your last slide, you talked about adjustments to stream flow forecasts for soil conditions. With the large extent of wildland fires that occurred last year, is there any adjustment that is made to consider the changed runoff conditions contributed from burn areas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Unfortunately, there's not at this time, but it is encouraging. I know there's a lot of research going on into getting additional monitoring into some of those major burns. We're working with several different researchers to get additional sensors and even some smaller additional stations in at least Cameron Peak and in East Troublesome. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't really just have the solid research to confidently introduce those into the numerical forecasts at this point.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Carl? Thank you for that, Carl. And just a reminder for our two presenters to please upload your presentations, and we will get that drought summary out next week. So now we're going to move into the report from our water impact task forces and water providers. Since we have so many people on the call today, let's start with the water providers. And let's see, you all look, it's kind of in alphabetical order. But why don't we start with Brian Fitzpatrick from Aurora?
Okay. As of a day or two ago, we were at 65% of capacity storage. Our biggest concern right now is Spitty Mountain Reservoir is our main regulatory and storage reservoir, and it is sitting at 50% of capacity right now, which is a concern. We are seeing our usual winter demands, so nothing unusual there. But 65% of average storage is about where we normally are this time of year. We're just concerned about the lack of water in Spitty.
Thanks. Okay, what about John Orr from City of Thornton?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Let me now click back. Our storage is sitting at, we're sitting at 72.8% of capacity, which is a little bit, well, it's actually below normal. We had drawn down one of our big storage vessels for a project, and we're hoping to refill in the spring. We normally are able to fill that reservoir in the fall. Stanley Lake is sitting at 30,917 acre feet, or 72%. And that's actually a little bit above average. And so we're feeling, right now, we think with a sort of normal runoff in Clear Creek, Stanley Lake might fill. Our production is dropped about 1% below 2020, but of course there isn't much of the year gone by yet. And and then consumption by our customers is about 2% below 2020. So we're, we don't, but it's winter time, and that reflects winter consumption, which is as steady as can be. We are going to council to ask them to activate our drought management plan. And we're looking at the same time at instituting permanent water rules, which are really, it's 3 days a week mandatory is the big part of that. So which stage we will start on, we don't know yet, but we're trying to be cautious. Our interdepartmental team recommended that we treat this like the start of a multi-year drought. And so let's see, that's the report from Thornton.
Thank you, that was helpful. I see a few folks on from Denver Water. Does someone want to take the lead on an update?
Yes, hey Megan, it's Jason Feinhout.
Hey there.
Hi everyone, good morning. So Denver Water's reservoirs right now are at 78% full. Normal for us is 82%, so we're just slightly below average. Our demand right now is actually slightly below average as well. Overall, with COVID, of course, we had a difference in some of our sectors, significant difference in water use, but overall, demand has been below average, which is wonderful and testament to our customers and their water efficiency. So our snowpack is around 75–80% in our snowtel sites specific to Denver Water. Of course, we're only a third of the way through our accumulation, normal accumulation, so the next couple of months will be critical for us. The earliest we consider going to our board and recommending restrictions, if we get to that point, the earliest would be March. We would not do anything before then, still kind of waiting and seeing. As an aside, we, along with some other of the providers here in the metro area, are going to start a metro drought coordination group. This group's goal will be to coordinate messaging to our customers, coordinate kind of what our activities are, lessons learned. So I'll be sending out an email about that after this meeting. I'll put my email address in the chat here. If anyone is provider is interested in joining that group, please do email me and I'll put you on the list as well. All right, that's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you for that. What about Isabel from Field?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
You can now, yes.
Okay, sorry. So let's see, our reservoir storage has been a bit low since the fall because mostly because we're doing some maintenance up at Barker Reservoir, but our combined reservoir storage is below average, again, mostly because of maintenance. But we're certainly keeping an eye on the snowpack up in our watershed because it's much lower than it is typically this time of year. Our demands, I think, are around average, and there's been some fluctuation based on the university in town, whether they're doing online. I think a lot of students have gone home out of town, and over the holiday, obviously, it closed down. So our production kind of fluctuates based on people coming and going. So it's been a little trickier to predict, but generally it's on par with winter usage. So we're definitely keeping an eye on the weather and are like everyone hoping for more snow in the spring.
Awesome, thank you.
We're actually also currently working on updating our drought plan at this time. So we don't have any plans to implement anything right yet, but we're hoping to put more information, provide a lot more information in our revised drought plan later this year.
Okay, please do reach out to me if you want some support in that process.
Great, thank you.
Yep. How about, is Emily or anyone from Northern on? Not seeing. Or, sorry, I'm like comparing lists here. What about Mike Fink from Fountain? Do you have any updates or just listening in?
Hi, it's Mike from Fountain. As with the other providers, we're a little bit low on our water storage, still reasonable. Our drought plan is based on our water storage and availability. and doesn't tie directly to the state's drought rating, although that is one topic that we're going to be talking about as we update our water master plan this year. Other than that, we go to the council in May every year for voluntary restrictions. Thank you.
Okay. What about Swithin?
For Highlands Ranch, our storage is 55% of capacity. That's about 25% lower than we normally are to start the year. So my personal meter has moved from cautious to kind of concerned. Our demands for the winter are staying right around normal, which would be expected. I would hope to see some wintertime irrigation. Biggest concern for me is the diminished snowpack and the very dry soils from previous year, 2020. One thing I am doing to be preemptive and prudent, planning on starting some of our groundwater wells producing water February 1st. That is about 3 to 4 months earlier than I would look at going to our wells. So just trying to preserve surface water capability for the high demand season of the irrigation.
Interesting, thank you. What about Karen from Telluride? I know I'm jumping around here, but do you have any updates?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Telluride's obviously very concerned about the low snowpack. It impacts a whole host of things, not just the water situation, but the ice here creates a lot of hazards for skiers, and then they end up in hospital, and it's COVID, so that's always challenging. So we're looking forward to hopefully the storm coming in. What we've been experiencing the last couple of years has been very low stream flows, about half of what one would expect, I think, in the upper San Miguel. And that also creates problems with our ski area being able to make snow. And so we're trying to troubleshoot some of that. Like some of my colleagues, we saw much lower water usage last year. That seems to be continuing through January. Final numbers need to be looked at. And like my colleague from Fountain, well, I'm very concerned and will, raise a caution flag with our town council. It looks, like we could anticipate that one of our major water sources, Mill Creek, may dry up this year. Looking at how dry the antecedent moisture is, so that would put us into water conservation mode. Is our ability to make water. We have not discussed whether the council should be looking more toward what's going on at the state level when they have these discussions. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. What about Andrew from Greeley? Do you have any updates?
Yeah, good morning, Megan. Greeley, we have reasonable water storage that was rolled over from last year in the CBT project and in our high mountain reservoirs. Demand so far for this water year has been fairly normal. Our biggest concerns right now are focused around the impacts from the Cameron Peak and the East Troublesome fire in mitigating possible ash runoff, snowpack scenarios come spring. So we're doing some modeling right now to determine potential impacts. And before the snow fell in the fall, we did some mitigation work on our high mountain reservoirs. Yesterday, our board approved a drought plan for Greeley, which will be a good tool going forward. And we'll see if we have to implement any measures from that this spring and summer. But currently, at this time, we don't anticipate any mandatory water restrictions, but we are doing outreach to try to get the point across to our citizens that this might be a different water year. So that's all I have to report.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's see, I am managing some chats here. Are there other providers I have skipped that have an update for everyone on storage and usage?
Yeah, this is Katie Mazurowski with Colorado Springs Utilities.
Oh, hi.
So right now our total reservoir storage is at about 71% of capacity, and our 2001 to 2019 average is 67% of capacity. So we're doing pretty good there, about 4% above where we normally are, which is really good coming into this dry year. Our demands have been very consistent with our past few years, so nothing out of the ordinary there. We're currently operating under our water-wise rules, which included things like watering 3 days a week, watering between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., etc. We're still operating under those. We'll continue to watch our snowpack and reservoir levels coming up in the next few months and determine if we need to take additional conservation measures. And I think that's about it from my end.
Thank you for that update. I'm sure I've skipped someone else, so if you would like to unmute yourself and speak up, go ahead. Let's see. Okay, what about some other updates? Maybe Joel from CSU or anything from GWR?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Joel. We're kind of in our winter pattern of, like most everybody knows, dry. The disconcerting message though is how dry last fall was, because we did some soil sampling into wheat stubble off station in some different areas, and south of and east of us a little bit is extremely dry. I mean, they didn't gain any moisture virtually after wheat harvest down in those areas. I was just looking at the reservoir storage up in the South Platte on the Plains reservoirs, and for the most part, they're about average where they're at compared to normal. So irrigation wise, it's going to be the upper basins and, upper part of the basin, and what stream flow is coming up in the spring, because that is a lot of the demand in reservoirs late storage or late water use typically. Dryland is going to be interesting this year. I mean, and the aquifer usage is going to be high, I think, this year again, because we just don't have any moisture coming in, and the forecasts don't look good. And as many of you know, we had a nice dirt event south of us. What was that, last week, Russ? Russ, you there? I heard you leave. You must have left. So the rest of this winter could be interesting, because we're not even into our windy part of the year unless we start getting some moisture.
All right, that is another rough update, but thank you. Let's see, who else? Trista, do you have any updates? Okay. Oh, Peter put an update about the wind on the 15th. So I can move into a few things around the drought plan activation before wrapping up, but I'm just going to leave some extended awkward silence here to see if there's other concerns or thoughts or things that people want to share from their corner or perspective. Okay. Is that long and awkward and silent enough? All right, I'm going to actually share my screen. This might be, I don't have many slides, but just something to help give a visual of where we're at. Oh, Ben, if you can you please make me a presenter? Let's see. Well, I'm not sure if that's gonna work. So I will just verbally give some updates. I'm just shooting my message real quick. So as hopefully most of you know or have received email updates, the drought plan has, there's been an extended activation into phase 3, November 30th, and that shift also activated a second task force, well, technically a third task force for response, which is the Municipal Water Task Force. So back in June, when we activated phase 2 of the drought plan, we activated the Agricultural Impact Task Force, which has been meeting bi-weekly really since August. And that group has been really responsive to producer needs and has actually recently prepared a summary of drought response. I can share a link to that document in the chat. But what I was going to point out on the slides was that the Municipal Water Task Force is just like this meeting today, which is a task force that reviews water availability monthly. This task force is a focus on supporting water providers through drought and is only activated during the plan, unlike this group, which is always active regardless of regardless of whether the drought plan is activated or not, or if we're in phase, a specific phase of the plan. The purpose of this group is really just to organize providers and assess their needs as early on in the drought season of 2021 as possible, to see what kind of support providers need, with the general reminder that we have over 700 different providers of all sizes and lots of different approaches and personnel staff that they actually have to prepare and respond to drought. And so we want to make sure that people have access to communication examples, have support through activating their drought plan if they have one, or really access to each other for lessons learned from past years, or to hear what providers are, how they're approaching this year in both preparedness and response. So we had a short kickoff meeting in December just to organize some of the first few people that we've gotten to represent that group. But the big news is that we had a big email push. Hopefully everyone has seen this. I am going to share some text in the chat since I can't share, for some reason, share my screen right now. And the crux of this message is that we have developed a survey to assess what water providers' needs are for this season to be able to respond appropriately with this task force. So the objective is very vague and the tasks are similarly vague to be able to respond to the particular type of drought or impacts that we're seeing. And the Municipal Water Task Force has only ever been activated once before for about 1 or 2 meetings. It's likely this group will be meeting far more than 1 or 2 meetings based on the updates, just climate updates that you all have heard today. All right, I'm sharing. So this text is just outlines kind of what this survey is. And as of this morning, and here is this actual survey link. As of this morning, we've had at least 100 individual responses, and we're asking for those responses to be complete by January 26th so that we can kind of coalesce what we've heard and use that to inform the agenda of the Municipal Water Task Force. Thanks, whoever is demoing. Thank you, Ben. So based on the SurveyMonkey responses, it has taken an average of 5 to 6 minutes for people to complete this survey, so it's not long, but it's really jump-starting kind of where on this long list of tasks that are examples in the drought plan, like where we start, what folks need in the spring, what do they need throughout the summer, you know, what can we tee up for the fall as far as response. Also, I forget exactly who said this in their update, but anticipating a multi-year drought here. Considering we're already in year 2. So I will pause for kind of questions. I hope some of you have seen that email or the survey already. If you haven't, feel free to email me directly, and I can send you the original email, which actually had listed a lot more resources to support drought response in addition. So I'm putting my email in the chat there. And yes, just feel free to go ahead and message me if you want some more information or follow-up. See. 1 second. The other link that I'm going to post in the chat here is the permanent link to the document that the Agricultural Impact Task Force created. And this is going to be circulated by those task force members, also to the legislature. And it is really just an interim product before a longer report from the ag producer view. So the Agricultural Impact Task Force is co-led by myself, CWCB, and Kate Greenberg at the Department of Agriculture, and the Municipal Water Task Force is co-led by myself and Desi Santre from DOLA, who I think is on the call or was earlier. So we are, thanks Ben, this is very helpful. We are open ears if you want to reach out to either of us, and we are just trying to make sure that we get broad enough representation that we can make sure that group is responsive, but also informative. So any general questions about state response at the moment? We had added some extra time into the agenda today, anticipating a few more people to join than are normally on. So if this is also your first time or you're not always in this meeting, also feel free to speak up and introduce yourself. These are always open public meetings, so you can share the link widely and always join in monthly. Go ahead. I don't know. Karen, did you have something to add?
Oh, no, I unmuted. Sorry, somehow.
Okay, no worries. Okay, well, I won't keep everyone here longer than necessary. Are there other thoughts, either from CWCB or Tracy from DWR, you'd like to share what we have?
Yeah, nothing from me, Megan. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for the good information.
Desi, thank you for posting your email there. And Sandra will reach out to you directly. So thanks for that note. Okay. We shall adjourn, and always reach out if you have questions in the interim before next month's update. Thank you, everyone.